Millions of women survive childbirth but suffer illness and disability. Since the ICPD, most countries have reported taking action to promote safe motherhood. Countries are also increasing access to family planning services to reduce unintended pregnancies. Only about 40 countries have initiated post-abortion care programs. Complications from unsafe abortions are a major cause of maternal death. ICPD have urged gender attention to this neglected issue. Next is preventing HIV and AIDS. In just over 2 decades, the AIDS pandemic has claimed 20 million lives and infected 38 million people. This number could rise greatly if countries do not pursue strategies to prevent HIV. Fewer than 20% of people at high risk of the infection have access to proven interventions. Consequences of AIDS are reaching great numbers. Since most HIV transmission is through sexual contact, reproductive and sexual health information and services provides an essential entry point to prevent by providing education of risk of the influence of sexual behavior. The ICPD recognized that distribution and violence towards women and girls, especially vulnerable and are affected and needs to be addressed about this gender inequality, and it's growing very quickly. Means to treat HIV have improved in the last decade, but the majority of these influenced lack access to any type of therapy that they need. About 3/4 of countries are burdened with this severely, reported having a national strategy on HIV and AIDS. Next slide is adolescents and young people. Since 1994, and especially in the past few years, countries have made significant progress in addressing the often issue of adolescents' reproductive health, including needs for information and services that will enable them to prevent unwanted pregnancy and infection. Young people ages 15 to 24 accounted for half of all new HIV infections and 1 every 14 seconds, with young women especially at risk. In a number of countries, early marriages and childbearing are still the norm for girls, usually to much older men. Married girls are less likely than others to contract HIV or another STI. ICPD and other organizations work in a variety of ways to teach young people about reproductive health in combination with developing life skills and job training. 90% of the countries report having taken steps to address adolescents' reproductive health, but efforts lag far behind the needs of successful interventions and need to be scaled up dramatically. Helping communities in crisis. Since the ICPD, attention to the reproductive health needs of women made vulnerable by war and disaster has increased greatly. 1/4 of the tens of millions of refugees in the world are women of reproductive age. 1 in 5 of these women is less likely to be pregnant. Death from complication during childbirth is far too common in disaster-stricken communities where women have no access to maternal health care. Rape and gender-based violence often occur during war, and victims of this abuse are more likely to contract an STI, including HIV or AIDS. UNFPA and other humanitarian groups respond to emergencies by providing basic materials needed for safe childbirth and protection from unintended pregnancies and STIs. They also support education campaigns and camp safely measures to prevent sexual violence and provide counseling and treatment for those who have been violated. Next is priorities for action. Successful action to implement the Sierra Agenda and other combat poverty depends on adequate funding and effective partnerships. Since the ICPD and its 5-year review, partnerships have developed between governments and a broad range of civil society organizations, including women's community groups, human rights organizations, and trade unions. Policy priorities for action in the next 10 years include better integration of population into national planning, broadening programs to meet the needs of the poorest population groups, reforming laws and policies to end discrimination against women. 10 years on from the ICPD, the world needs a vision of human-centered development more than ever. Today's challenges include security concerns and the continuing spread of HIV and AIDS make it imperative to carry out Sierra Agenda that is to better future for us all. Next is population and birth control. Many people believe that our population has to do with birth control, and some just don't believe that. For example, against the idea of population and birth control, people believe that high fertility is a reason to high death and disease rates. And if these levels are reduced, fertility would decline naturally. High fertility levels are perpetuated by the status and roles of women primarily as procreative agents. Fertility reduction is not worth the medical risk of using the medicinal means of population programs. Oral contraceptive devices have measurable, if small, short-term risks and possible long-term effects. People who support population and birth control might stand on the human rights position. According to the United Nations position, it is a fundamental human right for each person to be able to determine the size of his or her own family. Furthermore, some argue that each woman has the fundamental right to control her own body. In the past 30 years, there has been a marked decline. There has been a marked decline on world fertility rates, particularly in developing countries. Next, finally, is the conclusion. With that being said, there are many sub-issues when it comes to controlling the population of our world. But one thing individuals can do is reduce the amount you can consume and the energies we consume every day. All right, thank you.